Hey, it's Coach Anderson here again from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online, U.S. History from 1877 to present. Today we're going to pick up with Unit 5, and Unit 5 is the Progressive Movement from 1890 to 1920, where we'll primarily be talking about three presidents: Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and Woodrow Wilson. We're going to start by looking at the Progressive Movement as a movement to change America, to improve America, and that'll start by looking at starting with the populist movement. Now, we talked about the populist movement way back, I think, in unit number 3. And then looking at unit 3 in populism, we talked about the problems of the farmers. And the farmer reached out to the government and wanted to change not only his conditions, but he wanted to change the conditions of the American worker. So he tied his reforms to the American worker, and that's how we get the progressive movement a little bit later. We're going to start like we always do. We'll tell you that, if you have a journal, you should take out your journal, of course, and write down the various questions and the words, of course, the vocabulary words that you might see. And we'll try to address these as much as we can. And we will do what we can to make sure that we can get some idea about what the progressive movement was all about. From populism to progressivism, once again, from 1890 to 1920. The unit focus question, as we do with every one of our units, we try to give you a unit focus question. And what that unit focus question does is it gives us an idea about what the unit is going to be about. And what we want you to do as we go through and go over some of the elements in this particular lesson, we want you to try to pick out things that can help you, answer this particular question. The question for this particular unit is, how can government fix social problems? Remember what we said about the progressive movement. It was an idea about what the government or what society could do to fix some of its ills. We'll start with the journal topic today, and it's our Do Now activity. We'll give you a few moments, of course, to look over the question and then give you an opportunity, of course, to react to it. The journal topic says the Progressive Era was a period in American history where ordinary Americans wanted reform of business, government, and society. And the question that we have for you is, what areas of American society, business, or government do you believe could be improved today? So we'll give you a couple of moments, think about that question, and we'll come back in a moment and we'll talk about some possible responses. Hey, we should have had enough time that we should have been able to go through, of course, and look at the question. And remember what the question said again. It says, what areas of American society, business, or government do you believe could be improved today? Well, there are a whole lot of different directions that you could possibly go in. You can talk about the American political system. You can talk about the Supreme Court today. There's a lot of debate in our country whether or not the Supreme Court needs to be changed. We also looking at the primary system and the electoral college and populism. So there are a lot of different things on the governmental level that we can look at. And then we can also look in terms of looking at society. In terms of looking at society, one of the things, of course, that we can kind of look at is the water crisis that we've had in various cities throughout the United States of America, and even looking at infrastructure in terms of looking at America's aging infrastructure. So there are a lot of different things on both the government level and the societal level that we could look at, of course, and see about promoting some change. One of the big issues, a hot button issue today, of course, has been the repeal of Roe v. Wade. And in looking at that as a possible thing, that something, one of the societal reforms, of course, that could be addressed maybe if somebody, of course, were so inclined to do so. What we're going to do is go ahead and move on. We'll look at our vocabulary, of course, for this particular unit. And the vocabulary, we have academic vocabulary and content vocabulary. And as we go through the unit, what we'll try to do is highlight these particular words for you, and we'll try to give you a brief explanation of what it's all about. But in case we miss some, fear not, just go ahead, write it down in your journal, of course, and you can look it up yourself. The lesson focus question. For each lesson that we have, there's a lesson focus question. And what this focus question is about, it drives what the lesson is going to be about. It's kind of like our main idea. The question says, how did the progressive movement improve American society? And we'll start by looking at a few things. First and foremost, the origin of progressivism. Where did it come from? Well, we briefly touched on it a little bit. We said that it basically came out of the populist movement. The populist movement was a movement by the farmers to reform and try to gain better wages and working conditions for themselves. So when we look at progressivism, we started by journalists, teachers, and the clergy, politicians, and social workers. They were members of both political parties. They were primarily middle class or upper class, but they were concerned that society, of course, was was not paying attention to the needs of the lesser fortunate than them. Progressives believed that their strong beliefs in science and technology would enable them to solve society's problems. They believed that because America had advanced to the level that it had, there was no reason why some of the issues that the country, of course, was still faced with, that we should still be faced with. At this time, we will pause and see a video on the progressive era in America, how it originated, its impact, and students at this time, go ahead and access that video and enjoy the video and gain some great insights about the progressive movement and the improvement of America at that time. The muckrakers. The muckrakers. Who were the muckrakers? So, the muckrakers were the ones, they were the writers in American society that kind of made America, the rest of America, aware of what the problems were. Muckrakers were writers, and it was a nickname given to writers by Theodore Roosevelt. And what they did is they exposed corruption and problems, of course, in American society. They were that day's whistleblowers. The focus especially looked, their focus especially looked at the roles of big business practices in society, but it also talked about society's ills also, and why society at that time was going through the issues that they were going through. We have two prominent muckrakers that we'll talk about briefly. The first one is Ida Tarbell. She was concerned with the corruption, or what she felt like were the corrupt business practices of big businesses like Standard Oil Company. And then Lincoln Stevens on the right, he was more concerned with city government and the political machines and the power that party bosses like Boss Tweed had over politics in cities like New York City. So they both were about improving American society for American citizens. Jacob Riis. Jacob Riis was a muckraker that wrote a book called How the Other Half Lives. And what he talked about in that book was how there was a widening divide between America's wealthy and America's working class. And what he basically was trying to do is make sure that people understood that the country was going from people who were getting very, very wealthy, more and more wealthy every day, and then the working class was more or less that status quo, staying the same. So he was concerned about that, and by his writing, a lot of people recognized that there was probably some things that need to be done to ensure that American workers, of course, were taken care of a little bit better than they had been. Government efficiency. Well, one of the things that progressives believed is that they looked at a book that was written by Frederick W. Taylor, and in that book, it was called The Principles of Scientific Management, and in this book, he talked about principles that can make businesses operate more efficiently. Well, progressives believe that those same ideals that were in that book, the Principles of Scientific Management, could be applied to society as well. And they thought that, especially when it came to government, they said if you apply these types of principles, of course, to a city government, you can make it a lot more responsive to the needs of the people and a lot less corrupt. There were two types of city government organizations that were created, the commission form and then the city manager form. And what the idea was, if you put people who were in positions of authority who were smart, who were capable, who knew what they were doing, they would be less likely to be corrupt. And then city governments, of course, could operate a whole lot more efficiently. And then the whole idea, of course, is to get rid of those party bosses like Boss Tweed. Reforming government. Well, most of the reforms started with the city government level, but it kind of spread to the national government also. There were two areas that progressives wanted legislation to reform government, particularly at the municipal level. Municipal in this case means cities, one of those vocabulary words. Make government more efficient, less corrupt, and more competent. Commission form of government, city manager form of government at the city level. Institute democratic reforms like the direct primary, where people or individuals, citizens, would get the opportunity to choose who their candidates were. And then create three things that, of course, that will give people more say-so in how laws are created in the country. The first one was initiative. What it did is allow citizens to be able to put something on the ballot, of course, to be voted on. They were able to introduce legislation to the legislature to be voted on. And then create a referendum to allow citizens to vote on legislation, and creating the recall. And if there was a recall, meant that if you elected somebody that you weren't pleased with, what you could do, of course, is get a petition going, get enough signatures, And if you got the required amount of signatures, you could have a recall election or ask for a recall election where that person who's in that office could possibly be removed if a candidate emerges to run against him. The 17th Amendment also comes out of the progressive movement. And what the 17th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution did is it provided for the direct election of senators. Used to be what happened before the 17th Amendment is that each individual state legislature chose who the two senators that represented each state was going to be. With the creation of the 17th Amendment, for the first time, American citizens in a particular state were able to decide who their two senators, of course, were going to be. Here is a man by the name of Ballin Bob LaFollette. He was the governor of Wisconsin, and he created what they call was the laboratory of democracy in Wisconsin. He has long been considered one of those people that revolutionized how state governments, of course, should be run.